We are live officially. We are live officially. Okay, great. Hey everyone, so sorry about the issue with the audio earlier, but we are back. So my name is Rachel and I am the Development and Donor Relations Specialist here at Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. Today we have the opportunity to have Casey Greene with us, who is from the Childhood Cancer Data Lab, which is powered by Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. So he's going to chat with us about what big data is, what refined bio is, as well as what is the importance of sharing data in the field of childhood cancer research. So Casey, before we begin, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I'm a computational biologist. My training has been in everything from chemistry to genetics to computer science. And most of our work in the past has been in kind of integrative analysis of large scale data sets. So it's that ties in nicely to what we're doing here.
So how did you get to CCDL?
So my group was running actually hackathons in Center City, Philadelphia, focused on cancer genomics and data science. And one of the people who ended up attending one of these hackathons through the sort of year and a half that we did it was actually Jay Scott of the foundation. And so we started talking a little bit, and I guess that led eventually to here.
Nice. So before we get into the very specific questions about big data, can you explain a little bit what the Childhood Cancer Data Lab is? And we'll be referring to it as CCDL.
Yeah, so the goal of the Childhood Cancer Data Lab is to bring together data sets that will help us treat or cure childhood cancer. And so this means we've been bringing together data from lots of different sources. Some of the data, which we'll talk about, I think, a little bit more in the future, are really focused on childhood cancer. Other data, might be things that relate, but that we wouldn't immediately imagine. But yeah, so the goal is to have a team of people that are capable of putting these data together in interesting ways to identify new avenues that we can use to improve treatments.
Okay, so the Childhood Cancer Data Lab ties into data sharing, open data. So why is all of that collaboration so important and critical in this field?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons we can do this with an organization like Alex's so quickly is that there's actually a lot of public data that people have shared over the years. So at this point, more than about 2 million different sort of snapshots of biology have actually been generated and shared. And the fact that people have shared it means that now people like us can go ahead and download it and start to use it. So if you think about what that resource is, it's essentially a $2 billion resource that we can actually think about using for the public good. So yeah, so I think without open data, this wouldn't be available, it wouldn't be possible, and it would be decades in the making as opposed to something we're hoping to get off the ground in a much shorter time frame.
Nice. So can you explain what exactly is big data? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so big data is a difficult term to really define. Actually, it's kind of funny. In the field, one of the definitions of big data is data that are difficult to actually work with in your normal course of business. I think for considering how they matter in this context, I like to think of big data as a little bit like a dinner party. So imagine a situation where a scientist gets plunked down in front of a new experiment or a new patient sample they're looking at, and they need to understand what's going on. So it's sort of like you've shown up at a dinner party late. There's conversations going on all around you. There's a million people at this dinner party, and you've got to figure out what's going on so you can sort of interact with others. It's much like a scientist trying to figure out what's going on so they can cure this cancer.
Okay, so there's all these conversations happening, and that's the big data. So what does it mean to refine that data?
Yeah, so imagine lots of different conversations are happening, but some of them are in English, some of them are in Spanish. They're in many, let's say, hundreds of different languages. Most people will speak one or maybe 2 or 3 languages, but the number of people who could speak every language that anyone at that dinner party would use if it's a dinner party with millions of people is extremely small. And so by refining the data, what we really mean we're doing is we're sort of converting them to a common language so that a scientist who's working in one system with one platform can look at what someone else has done elsewhere and immediately sort of use that for their own research as well.
Okay, so there's all these conversations happening in all these different languages. So what exactly, how much data is there? How much childhood cancer data is out there for us to look at?
So in terms of the total amount of data, there's sort of 2 million of these snapshots. If we search those for just the text string childhood cancer, that gives us about 30,000 of them. But I think just looking at that 30,000 is probably the wrong way to go, because the way biological systems work, there's a lot of different pathways, and these pathways are interconnected and active in different conditions. So something might be active in a childhood cancer, but it might also be active in an adult cancer, or it might be active in a developing organism. And so I would say, I guess there's two answers. One answer is there's 30,000 sort of samples that have childhood cancer in the name. But I think in reality, there's a large fraction of that 2 million that probably tell us about what's going on in childhood cancers. And the sort of beauty of thinking of this as a sort of big data problem where we have to bring together more data to make sense of it is that we actually don't know where all the answers are going to come from in advance. So we think it's important to process as much data as possible and then to try to focus it on the systems that we really want to treat in the CCDL.
All right, so we're working with all these different data types. What is this data? Is it trials? Is it medications? Can you share a little bit more about what exactly we're looking at?
Yeah, so we're looking primarily at genomic data, primarily transcriptomic data. So that means we're looking at how genes are expressed. So this is why I keep referring to it as a snapshot. It's sort of like a moment in time of what was going on. And in terms of what the data actually include, so there are some clinical trials where, pre and post clinical trial, you can see, okay, this is how the system changed with the drug treatment. Some of them are developing systems. So there's, for instance, people will use zebrafish to study development. And so we'll see, how these zebrafish change over time, and that can actually tell us about the developmental processes that might be at play around the time that a childhood cancer actually seems to often arise in the population. And then, there's other data that are sort of cells in a dish where people have done something to those cells and treated them with a drug. And so all of that data is sort of a mishmash that it's this conversation that's going on with lots of different people and lots of different voices. And so it's all sort of it's essentially all different things in different ways that scientists are studying these systems.
Okay, so it's all these different things that scientists are studying. Now, is the data only coming from the United States, or are we looking at data on a larger scale globally?
Yeah, so we're actually downloading data that has been shared from anywhere in the world. So we're interested in essentially data from wherever it comes from, because we think putting together more data, particularly as it measures kind of different systems, is going to be the key to unlocking a lot of these challenges.
Okay, so not only do we have United States data, but we're going global and pulling data from the rest of the world. That's already a huge chunk that you're going to be working with. So are you going to be looking at pursuing and integrating private data at some point?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we've actually talked and thought about quite a lot, because it's one of the debates we keep having. There's so much public data that we think there's a lot of value there. And at the moment, we're primarily focused on getting that. We have designed the system we're developing called Refine.bio to be something that researchers could deploy at their own institution if they wanted to also process their private data. And that would let them process the data in the same way that we do, so they could look across. We've really been wrestling with the question of whether or not private data that sort of measures individuals belongs. Should it be held at a university or an academic medical center, or should it be held at Alex's or at an organization like Alex's? And so thus far, we've decided to sort of work with the public data and provide the tools to analyze the private data. That's the way we're going at the moment.
Definitely. So using this data, what does it actually mean for research and our researchers?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we talked to a number of scientists, and there's sort of all different things that they see as the potential for it. But I would say the kind of bread and butter of the system is, if we go back to our dinner party analogy, imagine that you're not only showing up at this dinner party, you're actually organizing it. And that means you've sort of got to prepare food and get things in front of your guests. And so essentially it's like for those people, it's like a line of sort of robotic prep cooks. So essentially we're trying to do a bunch of the prep work that is sort of routine and doable with automation. That way the scientists can actually focus on the really important scientific questions that they want to ask, instead of trying to get into the nuts and bolts of how to make this data set look exactly like that data set so they can do the comparison.
So we're saving a ton of time for our researchers.
Yeah.
So they can focus on the more important things.
Exactly. So we've hired a user experience designer, and one of her jobs has been doing foundational research. So she's actually gone around and interviewed scientists. And one of the numbers that she came back with that actually blew me away is that there are people who spend 30% of their time actually going back and reprocessing other people's data. So that's like, imagine you're giving a scientist another day and a half a week to do important science, as opposed to sort of going back and doing the reprocessing. So that's what we're seeing as efficiency.
You can do so much more.
Yeah.
So what researchers or people have access to this data or this process?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the question of, what should we do with the private data? And so because we focused on the public data, it means that we can make this completely available. So anyone, whether they're a researcher or a member of the public, although we expect it'll be much more useful for researchers, can come to the system and actually download uniformly normalized and processed data, so the data that are comparable, essentially the conversations that have been translated into a common language. And so we're hoping that researchers at academic institutions will use it. It also means that pharmaceutical companies or others who are working to develop treatments also have access to the data. And so we think this is important to provide it to all the individuals who are really trying to drive forward progress.
So I know that we talked about saving time and access to data. Why is this so significant specifically for childhood cancer research?
Yeah, so many childhood cancers are rare diseases. And so when you're working on rare diseases, particularly trying to use these sort of large data intensive approaches, one of the biggest challenges is just there's normally not enough data. So the types of techniques that people are using now to build self-driving cars and to identify funny cat videos on the internet, so these techniques require actually a lot of data. And to use them in the childhood cancer space, you need to be able to bring together data from childhood cancers, but also from other systems. So I think to essentially have the benefits of AI show up in the treatments we're developing, I think it's going to require putting together this type of data at this scale.
Okay. So what role will historical data play in this whole grand scheme of research and data refining?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Science is actually a process where each advance sort of builds on the ones that came before. And every once in a while, there's a tearing down process where we build something and then we realize, oh, we thought it was this way, but it's actually only this way in this specific case. Usually this other thing happens. So the progress of science is entirely sort of built on the past. Newton once said, if I've seen farther, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And so we think that taking advantage of the historical data is really important. There are new technologies that are coming onto the scene now that can let us measure cancers and other systems at the single cell level of resolution. I think these are going to be enormously important. But I do think being able to look back at what we've seen in the past throughout science, that's been sort of critical to discovery. So I think we are interested in processing the historical data that we can process efficiently so that we can do this sort of look back to see where we were in the past, as well as sort of what we're finding now.
Okay, so the project that you guys are working on is incredibly important. So what makes Childhood Cancer Data Lab so unique than all the other organizations that may have pursued this?
Yeah, so there are other groups that have put together data from many different experiments. Usually they're doing it just looking at a single platform at a time, which is basically like, imagine you were putting together all the English language conversations and all the Spanish language conversations, and you're putting together each of these sets separately. We see a lot of value in trying to reach this sort of common language where now you can look across data regardless of which exact technology was used to capture it. So this should give us a much broader swath of biology that we can now start to look at.
So complete translation.
Yeah, well, that's what we'd like. Yeah.
That'd be fantastic. So what are the plans for the future for CCDL?
Yeah, so right now we've talked almost entirely about kind of the data aspect of the data lab, but putting the data to use is actually probably more important than getting the data in the first place. And so we're doing a couple things to improve this. So one thing is for using the tools we're developing, we're building a short course or a series of short courses that researchers could take advantage of to start to understand how to use these data in more complex ways. So to take advantage of machine learning and other new technologies that will let them essentially use these data better than they have been. The other thing that we're working on are web-based tools so that a researcher on their laptop or iPad can do the really common analyses, so the things that our user experience designer is finding people doing all the time without writing a single line of code. So they could load up their iPad, they're at a seminar, they hear someone talk about a gene of interest and a tumor of interest, they load it up on their iPad, and then they can see everything that we know about that system.
Oh, nice. That would be very convenient. So what have been some of the thoughts from the researchers who have expressed interest in the projects that you guys are working on?
Yeah, so one of the things that we found, many of the researchers are really interested in just the efficiency gains. I mean, essentially, if you tell someone you can have a day and a half of your week back to do additional science, that makes people really happy. I think it's a little bit harder to imagine imagine what you would do if you had something that has not existed. It's a little harder to figure out what you would do in that case. As a researcher who's worked with deep learning and other types of machine learning algorithms, I'm excited about the potential there, but I would say most researchers, I think, are excited about just getting the improved efficiency of their own research.
All right, I know you just mentioned what you're excited about, but is there anything else that you're excited about with working on this project with Childhood Cancer Data Lab?
Yeah, so I think it's been a nice opportunity to, and it is a really nice opportunity to interact with many researchers. It gives us a really different perspective. So as a sort of scientist in the lab, even in a computational lab, you spend most of your time kind of working on specific algorithmic improvements that make something possible. And to sort of change the perspective and think about, not how do I make this one thing better, but how do I make a field more efficient using data, using the expertise that I've accrued over the years. I think that's been really exciting. And working with an organization like Alex's to do this, where everyone is so motivated by a single mission, I think it's a special opportunity.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm done with asking you my questions, but I want to turn it over and see if you guys have any questions for Casey. I know there's a couple of you online, and hopefully you have a question that he hasn't answered already. If not, you can always log online to their website, and there is plenty of information. And that is childhood cancer.
ccdatalab.org.
There you go. So let's see if there are any questions currently. Okay, so I don't see any right now, but thank you all for showing up and coming back, even though we had audio issues earlier. So thank you so much, Casey. Thank you so much for sharing all this and teaching us about what big data is. It's a huge project. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you, and thank you guys. I hope you have a great weekend coming up.